right. One thing, you need to promise that you will not play Pokemon during service. I'm a teacher, so I can spot it. Okay. We're going to continue on. Oh, how was summer, by the way? It's good? Hot. We're going to continue on in our series in Genesis, and we'll see how long this takes us. So just a quick review of Genesis, and then we'll catch up with where we're at. Okay. Need to stall while Victor gets back to the slides. Okay. So here's where we've been so far in the book of Genesis. The very first message was simply this: God created. God created us. God created everything that we see. We are not an accident. We are a purposeful creation of a loving creator. So we are here with a purpose. We are not here by some chance accidents of molecules colliding over billions of years, and all of a sudden here we are. Okay, so we started with that. We took a look next at this idea of the fall, that God gave us everything that we could ever need. God gave us everything that we could ever want. And he said, but there's just this one thing that you cannot have on your terms. But we as a people said, no, God, I don't want you telling me what to do. I want it on my terms. I want what I want. I want to live the way I want to live. But right at that moment when we rebelled against God, God put in process a plan to restore all of creation, all that we messed up. God put into process a plan to fix the broken relationship and the broken trust between us and Him. Well, I'll explain, okay? And we see that because the moment of the fall, the moment Adam and Eve said, God, we want to do it our way, immediately God said, I am going to bring a one. It says in Genesis, there's going to be a one. And that one is going to restore everything that fell away because of man's rebellion. And so what I want us to see is that God did not react, or God is not... Let me start over. What I want us to see is that we serve a God who does not change. That the idea of God fixing things, the idea of God sending Jesus to earth to restore the broken relationship is not a New Testament idea. That idea of God restoring relationship did not start with Jesus, but it started all the way in Genesis. The very moment we rebelled, God was in complete control enough to say, I have a plan to fix this. And I'm going to send a one. And that one is going to undo all that sin did. And he was going to bless this guy named Abraham. So he talked about Abraham. And he was going to use Abraham to be a blessing to the world. And how he was going to do that is Abraham was going to grow from a man and a wife. And he was going to grow into a family. And that family was going to grow into a nation. And that nation would bring the presence and the Word of God to the world. And what we come to understand now as Christians is that out of the line of Abraham, out of this family of this nation, came the one, Jesus, who fixed everything that got messed up because of sin. But there's a problem. Because Abraham was 100 years old and childless. So how could this man grow into a family, grow into a nation that would be a blessing to the world? How could God possibly make this happen? So in chapter 18, 5 weeks ago, we read how 3 men, and these 3 men were actually God and 2 angels that came disguised as men, came to Abraham just to remind him that, hey, this promise that seems like it's not happening, it seems impossible, right? You're 100 years old, and this seems totally impossible. It's going to happen within a year. And after this exchange where God kind of encouraged Abraham, Abraham also came to realize that God's next move was going to be to destroy these 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. And the reason that God was going to destroy these cities is because these cities were that wicked. And it says in Genesis chapter 18, verse 20 through 21, it says, the Lord said, because the outcry, say outcry. Let's do that again. Say outcry. Outcry. Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry. Say outcry. That has come to me, and if not, I will know. The Hebrew word translated outcry is usually used to describe the cries of the victims of some injustice. So when we see that word, what that indicates is there was some sort of injustice that was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. It's often used in situations where God needs to intervene because it's that bad. So when the slaves in Egypt cried out to God, God heard their outcry and came and intervened because it was that bad. So the idea here is there's some injustice happening that was so wicked that God had no choice but to intervene to make it right. There was some sort of oppression. We get a sense of what's going on in Ezekiel chapter 16. It says this, verse 49, "Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess food, and prosperous ease." So this city was doing well. But here's what it says, "But did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me. So I removed them when I saw it." So there is some wickedness going on in these cities, and we'll see how that unfolds as we read chapter 19. So Abraham starts pleading with God. He's saying, "God, are you sure you want to destroy these cities?" And he makes this deal. "God, what if there are 20 righteous? What if there are 30 righteous? What if there are 10 righteous? Will you destroy it?" With the full understanding that ultimately it's going to come down to God's decision. And the reason why Abraham was pleading and arguing with God is because his nephew Lot lived in one of those cities. So he had a relative that was living in these wicked cities that God was about to destroy because of the outcry. Are you with me? Nod. Okay. So let's read Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 through 11. Okay. "The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth." So Lot is Abraham's nephew. "And said, 'My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way.' They said, 'No, we will spend the night in the town square.' But he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house." That's going to be important. "And they called to Lot, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Okay, so we may know them. Know in the biblical sense is literally have intercourse. So it's not like we want to get to meet them so we can find out about them. This is literally we want to have intercourse with them. "Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, 'I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof.' But they said, 'Stand back.' And they said, 'This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them.' Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And then they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door." Oh my gosh, what is going on? Pretty crazy scene. What I want us to see is the hints that there is something wrong in Sodom. There is something definitely off. There is something that's not right. One of the big things in the culture back then was this idea of hospitality. You do not mistreat aliens or travelers that come into your city. If a traveler was going to come into your city, you treat them well. If they were a very special person, you give them a feast. And yet what we see here is these people of Sodom are not treating these journeymen well, these aliens well. They actually want to abuse them. They actually want to humiliate them. To not treat somebody well was considered shameful back in the days. If someone comes to your house and you don't greet them and you don't provide for them, that is considered a very shameful act. And yet what we see in Sodom is they don't care. There's something backwards in the city. Right? Because what's a safer place if you're traveling? A safer place, would it be out in the open or within the walls of the city? Normally, the safest place would be within a city. But what we see here is it's actually backwards. It's not safe in the city. And it's actually probably safer to be out in the desert, in the wilderness. Where's the safest place to stay at night? The safest place to stay at night is inside somebody's house. And yet these two men are like, no, we don't want to stay in your house. We want to stay out in the town square. There's something wrong. There's something backwards. There's something wicked that is indicated by these events. And then, like I mentioned before, this mob wants to come and basically, for lack of a better word, rape these two travelers that have entered their town. It says men, all men from every sector. So every man in the city, every age group is represented. Everyone, young, rich, old, poor, it doesn't matter. They all came to Lot's door and they wanted to know these two men. Jude, verse 7 says, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, served as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Okay, let's take a step back, because this is a very controversial issue now in the days, and I'm not going to go there. But I want you to think about something, okay? It is highly unlikely that every single man in that city was homosexual. Yes? The probability of every man in this mob that is wanting to know these two men, the probability that 100% of them are homosexual is very, very low. And in fact, we know that because Lot offers what? His daughters. He says, instead of having these two men, have these daughters, right? And so if everyone in that crowd was homosexual, why would Lot bother offering the daughters? Okay? So here's why I say this. Okay? Because what is really happening is culturally, when this situation happens, a lot of loaded words today, but I'll just say it and I'll edit it out later. When homosexual intercourse happens in this context, it actually has nothing to do with being gay or not. It actually has to do with wanting to degrade another person. It actually has to do with wanting to show dominance and wanting to show hatred towards that person. Okay, so that's why in Jude it says they're doing, what did Jude say specifically? Unnatural desire. Okay, so most likely what is happening is you had these group of men who were heterosexual, but they were indulging in this homosexual practice because they wanted to degrade these travelers. Okay? Now I bring up the culture context because of this. The church is doing a horrible job, I think, really dealing with this issue. And personally, I think there's a lot more thought and a lot more research that needs to be done in terms of this whole issue. But what's happening culturally has nothing to do with being gay. What's happening culturally here is they want to humiliate these two travelers when culture dictates that they should welcome them. And all I want us to see here is there is something twisted about the people of Sodom. There is something slightly off, and that's why God hears this call. God hears this outcry, and he's going to come, unfortunately, to destroy these two cities. Are you there? Was that too heavy? See how I avoided the big issue? Okay, so here's what I hope we would see about God. There's this guy Lot, a person in Abraham's household, who is living in the middle of this society that is just steeped in wickedness, that is so lost and living in a way that is so far from God that they're doing all these acts. There's indication of their hearts. But here's what I hope we would see. That even in the midst of that, God goes out of his way to rescue a person who doesn't even realize he needs rescue. God sends his two angels. God sends messengers. God goes out of the way to rescue a person who didn't even realize he needed to be rescued. Genesis chapter 19, verse 16, it says this, but he, talking about Lot, lingered. He lingered. So the men seized him. So the two angels grabbed him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, and the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. He lingered. See, Lot was fine where he was at. I'm good here in Sodom. I don't need to be rescued. But Lot did not understand that judgment was coming. So Pearl Church, this whole journey through Genesis has been hopefully locking in the idea that the theology of who we understand God to be has not changed from Genesis. And I hope that we would see that we can understand God to be someone who is about rescuing a people who don't even realize they need to be rescued, but who desperately, desperately need it. Because judgment is coming. That God came to rescue a people who chose against him. That rescued a people that were fine the way we were and were like, God, don't mess with my life. I'd rather have it my way. Most famous verse in the Bible is John 3:16. But I think the most important verse in that chapter, one of the most important verses, is John 3:19. And I always come back to this verse. So John 3:16, God so loved the world. John 3:19, see, we stop reading there. And this is the judgment, that light has come into the world. And the people loved what? Darkness. Rather than the light, because their works were evil. So God comes and God's like, I need to rescue my people. And his people are like, we're good, God. We're fine where we are. We love the way we live. Don't mess with the way we live. We love the darkness. Because we don't understand where the darkness is leading us. We don't see the consequences of that darkness. We don't understand that the way we lived before we knew God was separating us from the source of all love and satisfaction. We love the darkness. And yet God inserts himself into a story, into history, to rescue a people who don't even understand that they need to be rescued. In the midst of a people who are blinded, in the midst of a people who deny that God exists, in the midst of a people who are comfortable, he starts this process to rescue. That's why Romans chapter 5, verse 6 says this, for while we were still weak, some translations say, while we were still sinners, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. See that? We were thinking we were okay. We thought we didn't need rescue. We were sinners. So God didn't rescue us because we deserved it. God didn't come and rescue us when we were getting better. God didn't rescue us when we had some sort of revelation on our own and we thought about it and we go, hey, I really need God to rescue us. No, God rescued us when we were denying him. God rescued us when we were happy within our Sodom. God rescued us when we were living lives that were leading down a path that was actually moving away from him. God rescued us when we didn't even realize that we needed it. When we were just as guilty as everybody else, he rescues a people who didn't even understand that they needed rescue. This is central to our theology. This is critical to understanding that we did nothing to deserve. This is critical to understanding that we did nothing to come to the understanding that I need rescue. God came and rescued a people who didn't understand they even needed to be rescued. Amen by myself. Right, so, how is that lived out now, right? So if we understand that salvation comes when we didn't deserve it or ask for it, that salvation came because God knew we needed it, how does that live itself out in our day-to-day life? How does this idea of rescue? So if you know God, you can say, okay, God, I'm saved, but you still got to live the life now. So at a micro level, how does this idea of being rescued work itself out? Well, we all have situations where we need to be rescued. Even now, don't we? There are situations where we're like, God, I'm okay this way. And God's like, no, that leads down a very destructive path. So let me give you some time to just pause and reflect. What do you need to be rescued from? Right? Yeah. Yes, you're a Christian, but even in the midst of that walk, you need to be rescued from things. Are there habits you need to be rescued from? Are there situations you need to be rescued from? Are there people you need to be rescued from? Do you need to be rescued from your thoughts? Do you need to be rescued from grudges you hold that just imprison you in anger and hatred? Do you need to be rescued from your insecurities? Do you need to be rescued from your doubts of your identity? Like, who am I? Does God love me? We all need to be rescued from something. So just think for a moment, and may God bring to mind, hey, you need to be rescued from this, whether you know it or not. You need to be rescued from regrets, things in the past. Right? It's often said that too many of us allow our past to affect our present and taint our futures. Is that you? Right, we all need to be rescued from something. So how does this play itself out? Let's read on, verse 12. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. Tragic. We'll talk about this in a couple weeks. Verse 15. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. That's the only reason, right? The Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight. And you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, the city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. And he said to him, behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city is called Zoar. Verse 23, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So there's this urgency in this story, isn't there? It's like, Lot, this thing's going to happen. Or we got to get out. And Lot lingered. You got to get out. There's something that's going to happen. We got to leave. And there's this sense of urgency. It's kind of that situation my wife asked me about earlier this week. What if there was an emergency and we had to leave the house really quickly? What would you bring? I never have a good answer. The kids, I guess, but that's a given. Right? What would you bring? Anyone? Anyone have a good answer to that? If your house was burning down and you had to get out. What is it? Passports. Good. What else? Insurance card. Very practical. What else? No memorabilia, I guess. No? Yeah, I don't know. Right? But the point is, in those situations, we realize something, right? We realize that we can only take some things, but other things we must what? We must leave behind. In the process of being rescued, sometimes it requires us to leave behind some things. In the process of God rescuing us from whatever situation, whatever habit, whatever regret, whatever thought process, all these things that we need rescue from, sometimes God asks us to leave behind certain things in the process of being rescued. That's why we get verses like Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us what? Lay aside. In other words, leave behind every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. If you want rescue, if you want growth, if you want to get out of this situation, maybe you got to leave things behind. We see Philippians chapter 3. Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind. In other words, leave it. Mistakes, victories, leave it. Regrets, leave it. And straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Can I get Kevin up here? Here's kind of the picture I want us to have of what is happening here in this process of rescue. Let's say I hand Kevin here. Kevin, hold this box. Okay. Kevin, can you hold this drums and this guitar case? Okay. Notice his hands are very full. Now, if I wanted to give him something more valuable, could he take it? Probably not. In order for me to hand him something more valuable, it requires him to do what? Leave it behind. It requires him to take all these things that he thinks, this is so important, these things that he holds on to, these things that are actually weighing him down and stopping him from getting to rescue. And I can't give him anything unless he does what? He leaves it behind. Unless he drops it. So Kevin, don't drop it, but let's put it down. You can leave it behind. Okay, can we give Kevin a hand? Right, so that's the picture of rescue in this passage. Is Lot, you can't take it. In fact, the things that you have been holding you back. Living in the city has been holding you back. To be rescued, you have to leave the city. You have to leave what's comfortable. You have to leave your home. You got to leave it behind. There was this Christian band back when Christian music was somewhat decent. Still pretty bad, but it was all right. Called Audio Adrenaline. Who remembers this band at all? Hey, okay, very good. Actually, they were very good, I thought. Meaningful songs. But there was one song in particular that they wrote called The Good Life. Anyone know that song? Ah, good. This will be new. So they wrote this song called The Good Life. And there's a really fascinating story behind it. I'm going to show us a video clip of actually the lead singer of the band who wrote the song, and he's going to share a little bit about how he wrote the song, but also, how should I say this, how God used that song in his life. So Victor, can we play the video?
In 1998, we were working on a record called Underdog. We were writing the record, and I'd met up with a friend of mine who we'd known for a while. He was from Texas. He was a photographer, and he was obviously different. He looked different. He lost a lot of weight, dyed his hair, and just kind of looked like he was going through some stuff. And I was like, man, what's happening? And he was like, man, my wife has left me, and I'm messed up. It kind of took me by surprise, so I gave him a big hug. I invited him to come to Nashville and hang out. I remember sitting around the coffee table one afternoon, we were talking, and he was literally crying and just like, this is one of the lowest points in my life. I'm just so desperate. He started to get this glimmer of hope in his eyes, and he was like, you know what, though, this is the closest I've ever been to Jesus in my whole life. And I was like, man, I gotta write a song about this. It's perfect for the Underdog record. I wrote with some of the guys in Audio A this song called Good Life. And the chorus of Good Life went like this. This is the good life. I lost everything I could ever want, ever dream of, but this is the good life. I found everything I could ever need right here in your arms. You know, fast forward about 7 years, I was going through the same tragedy. I was going through a divorce. My marriage is falling apart, and things had really come to an end. And me and a friend of mine packed up half of the furniture in our house and put it into a U-Haul truck. And I watched my wife drive away. And it was, you know, so surreal. I walked back into the house. I remember laying down on the floor. And, you know, for the first time, I cried myself to sleep. I remember the sun coming in the window and waking me up in the morning. And I'm like, oh, man, I don't want to do this, you know. But life goes on. And I remember thinking to myself as I walked down the steps and I looked out at my Bronco. I was this older truck out there. I was thinking, this is the first day of the rest of my life, and it was really freezing cold. I remember thinking that my truck wasn't going to start. And I was like, God, I need to know you're here right now. And I put the keys in the truck. And I prayed one more time. I turned the ignition over, and boom, you know, the truck started up. And then music filled the cab. I heard this song, and it was, this is the good life. I lost everything I could ever want or ever dream of, but this is the good life. I found everything I could ever need right here in your arms. And at that moment, you know, I realized that God just didn't start my truck, that he had the song queued up on the local radio station the exact moment I needed him to. And all the doubts and fears and frustrations that I was thinking about just kind of got washed away. And he said, I got you. And there in that Bronco on that really freezing cold Tennessee morning, I've never felt so warm in my whole life. And I realized that everything was going to be all right. Even in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of heartache, even at these times, you can experience the good life.
Isn't that, it's pretty amazing, right? If you didn't catch it, he wrote a song, and after he got divorced and was about to give up and just thought, this is it, turns on the radio, and that song comes on. Let me read the lyrics. All right, here's the lyrics. This is the good life. I've lost everything. How can you write that? My goodness. I could ever want and ever dream of. This is the good life. I found everything I could ever need here in your arms. Let's leave that up. So what he's saying is, I found the good life by losing, by leaving behind all these things, even in the midst of divorce, right? But there's actually more to the story that he didn't share. Because if you notice, his voice was a little bit broken. This guy is a lead singer of a multi-platinum band that has been around for ages. And what actually also started happening around the same time that he was going through this divorce is he started losing his voice due to a genetic defect. And so resting the voice, none of that helped. He just kept losing his voice. So this guy whose entire life was about singing, that this guy who the way he served God was through his voice, all of a sudden had no voice. But yet, he shares time and time again through this whole process of getting divorced. Not that divorce was good for him at all, no. But of losing his voice, that he truly understood the words to the song he wrote. This is the good life. I've lost everything. Because what God did through that time where God actually, instead of him leaving things, God kind of sort of took like his voice in a sense, he was able to be free to do so much more different types of ministry. And soon he started starting up ministries in Haiti right before the earthquake. And he started up all these other things that was probably more widespread than what a little Christian band could do. And what I want us to see through this testimony is sometimes it happens where we have these things that we think are so important, don't we? These things that we hold on to and we clutch onto that we think, if I don't have this thing, I'm not me. If I don't have this thing, this reputation, if I don't have these gifts, if I don't have these things, that God, I'm nothing. I can't even serve you. That I need these things. I don't want to leave these things behind. They're too important to me. And God says, no. All you need is me. All those things. Your voice, your talents, your successes, even your regrets, your anger. You don't need those things to be you, to be complete, to be rescued. All you need is me. So leave it behind. Because the road to rescue sometimes requires for us to leave behind the very things that make us so comfortable, the very things that we think we really need. But God shows us, you don't need those things. You just need me. We close our eyes. Get Rashid up. I don't know if during the time of reflection, God brought things to mind. But let's just spend some time maybe praying through those things. You know, I had a friend ask me this week, like, what does it really mean to forgive? Because this friend had a lot of unforgiveness in their life. And I came to realize that unforgiveness is very poisonous to us. And unforgiveness seems like we hold power over that person, but really it's just killing us, right? So that's why I kept mentioning that. Maybe for some of you that's true. Maybe you just have a lot of unforgiveness that's holding you back. Maybe for some of us it's situations that just seem impossible. Situations at work or personal problems that just is like, God, can you show up, please? God, can you get me out of this? Can you fix this? Maybe for some of us, it's just these cycles, these habits, like we can't break it. We try and we try and we try. And it's like, God, I'm still in my Sodom. I'm still here. I can't break out of this. Can you rescue me? And if God did bring something to mind, would I also ask us to be brave enough and open enough to allow Him to show us if there are things that are preventing us from running to His rescue? If there are things that we just want to hold on to and either we know it's not good or it might be good, but God shows us that maybe we need to let go of that. Maybe we need to understand that we don't need our voice to serve God. We don't need that to be us. We don't need to feel a certain way to be validated and loved. Could we also just be vulnerable and let the Spirit show us, hey, you need to maybe think about leaving this behind. So Rashid will just play a little bit, and then we'll give us some time to pray. And then in a few minutes, we'll close in one last song and sing on to our rescuer.
all stand and sing to God together. I could just sit. I could just sit. I could just sit and wait for all your goodness. Hope to feel your presence. I could just stay. I could just stay right where I am and never feel you. I hope to feel something again. I could hold on. I could hold on. I could hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. I could be saved. I could be saved here in your arms and never leave. Never let these walls down. You have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You lead me. Save us even when we didn't realize that we needed rescuing, Lord. And God, just help us to follow you, Lord, and follow your calling, follow what you want us to do, and guide us to know what things you want us to let go of, Lord. Thank you and I love you. In your name I pray. Amen.
Thank you for coming to the Pearl. Next week, Abraham finally gets a son. Okay, might be less yelling, but no guarantees. Join us for dinner, and also there's a card for Erin by the offering box if you would like to sign just to congratulate her for how many years? 6 years of hard work and finally graduated. So let's give it up. And she'll share next week about what God did through that. All right.